There is a man living outside the city walls, not by choice, by law. He has not been inside a house and he has stopped counting the years. He calls out when people walk near him, not to greet them, but to warn them away. Unclean, he says. The Hebrew word is tameh. It means more than sick. It means severed, removed from the community of God's people, from the temple courts, from the warmth of anyone who loves him. No one has touched him in so long that he has forgotten what it feels like. And then, one morning, word reaches him that a teacher from Nazareth is walking the road outside Capernaum. A man who heals. A man who, and this is the part that made the leper stand up and start walking. A man who heals without asking too many questions. He runs, which is already illegal. A man declared unclean was required by Leviticus chapter 13 to keep his distance, to call out his own contamination like a warning bell. He is supposed to stay away, but he runs anyway, and he throws himself on the ground in front of Jesus. And he says something that is not quite a prayer and not quite a question. He says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." If you are willing, not if you are able. He has already decided what Jesus can do. The only thing he doesn't know is whether Jesus wants to. You have said something like that before. Maybe not to a man on a road in Galilee, but in some room, in some dark hour, you have asked the same question. Not, "Lord, can you?" but, "Lord, do you want to? Am I the kind of person you would do this for?" Here is what Jesus does. He reaches out his hand and he touches him. The Greek word Matthew uses for what happens next is katharizo, to cleanse, to make utterly pure. And it happens immediately. The text says the leprosy left him at once. But stay with the touch for a moment, because that touch was illegal. Under Mosaic law, contact with a person declared unclean made you unclean. Jesus knew the law better than anyone in that country. He recited it in the temple at age 12. He did not have to touch this man to heal him. He had healed people from a distance. He had healed with a word. He chose to touch him. He reached across the purity code of the entire nation and put his hand on a man that nobody had touched in years. That is not an accident. That is a decision. Now, pay attention to this, because the next story starts 12 years earlier on the other side of Galilee, in the life of a woman who has been bleeding since the year this leper first went outside the walls. 12 years. The Gospel of Mark tells us she had suffered under the care of many physicians. The word suffered is doing a lot of work in that sentence. She had spent everything she had. She was not healed. She was worse. According to Leviticus, her condition also made her ceremonially unclean, not like the leper, not with a public declaration, but enough to mean that her touch could render others unclean, enough to mean that social and religious life had slowly, quietly closed around her like a door. She hears about Jesus. She does not go to him directly. She doesn't call out to him. She doesn't ask for an appointment. She makes a decision that is either the bravest or the most desperate thing a person can do. And in her case, it is both. She decides to get close enough to touch the edge of his garment. Not his hand, not his face, the hem, the fringe at the border of his robe. She pushes through the crowd, and the crowd she knows is full of people her touch could technically make unclean. She reaches out her hand and she touches the hem of his robe, and immediately the bleeding stopped. She felt it in her body before her mind caught up. 12 years of pain, gone in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Here is what most people miss. Jesus stops in a crowd, In a press of bodies so thick, the disciples are bumping shoulders with strangers. Someone touches the hem of his robe. One person, one small contact, in a crowd of dozens. And Jesus stops walking and says, "Who touched me?" The disciples think he has lost his mind. "Master, the crowd is pressing against you on all sides. And you ask who touched you?" But Jesus is not confused. He is not making a theological point for the benefit of future readers. He is looking for someone, because the Greek word the gospel uses for what he felt is dunamis, power, miracle working force. He felt it leave him. The healing cost him something. He did not dispense grace the way a vending machine dispenses change. Something went out from him, and now he wants to find the person it went to. She comes forward trembling. She falls at his feet. She tells him everything. 12 years, the physicians, the money, the crowd she just pushed through, and he calls her something that nobody in that story had probably called her in a long time. Daughter, not woman, not you there. Daughter, a word of belonging, a word that means you are not an outsider in this story, you are family. If you are sitting with something chronic right now, something that has not gotten better despite every effort, every prayer, every appointment, I want you to hold that word. Daughter, son. The healing in this story did not come because she had the right theology or the right amount of faith or because she had suffered enough to deserve it. It came because she reached. That's all. She just reached. Now, before we go further, if this kind of storytelling is opening something in you, take a moment and subscribe. There is a lot more of this ahead, and don't go anywhere, because the next person on this list changes everything we think we know about who Jesus stops for. Jairus is a synagogue ruler. He is, by any measure, the opposite of the bleeding woman. He has a name, he has a title, he has a daughter who is dying, and he has enough public standing to push through to the front and fall at Jesus' feet in the middle of a crowd without anyone finding it strange. Jesus agrees to come. They walk, and on the way, this is where the bleeding woman story interrupts everything. Word arrives from Jairus' house. Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Jesus hears this. He turns to Jairus and says, don't be afraid, only believe. They arrive at the house. The mourners are already there. The wailing, the flutes, the professional grief of first century Jewish funeral culture. Jesus says the girl is not dead, but sleeping. They laugh at him. Not politely. The text says they laughed him to scorn. He puts them all outside. And then, with only the parents and 3 of his disciples, he goes into the room where she is lying. He takes her hand. The Aramaic he uses, the actual words, are preserved in Mark's gospel. Talitha cum. Little girl, arise, and she gets up and walks. Here's the part nobody tells you. Every healing touch in this list is different. The leper, Jesus initiates. The bleeding woman, she initiates. Jairus' daughter, she can't initiate anything. She is dead. Jesus reaches into a room full of grief and takes the hand of someone who cannot reach back. There are seasons in life when you cannot reach, when the faith is gone and the words are gone, and the only thing left is the fact that someone who loves you is still in the room. This story is for those seasons. Now we need to talk about a woman and a jar of perfume. Luke chapter 7 places Jesus at the home of a Pharisee named Simon. A woman comes in. Luke calls her a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town, which is the first century way of saying everyone knew her name for the wrong reasons. She comes in carrying an alabaster jar of perfume, which was not cheap. She stands behind Jesus as he reclines at the table. and she begins to weep. Her tears fall on his feet. She doesn't have a cloth, so she does the only thing available to her. She lets down her hair, which was itself a socially scandalous act for a woman in that setting, and she dries his feet with it. Then she breaks the jar and pours the perfume over his feet and kisses them. Simon the Pharisee watches all of this and thinks to himself, if this man were really a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. Jesus turns to Simon and tells a parable about two debtors, one who owed a small amount, one who owed everything. Both debts are canceled. Which one, Jesus asks, will love the creditor more? Simon answers correctly without realizing what he is answering. Then Jesus says something that has stayed in the church for 2,000 years. Her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. Not forgiven because of her great love. Forgiven, and her love is the evidence. And he says to her directly, not to Simon, not to the table, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Now, watch what happens next. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the early 4th century in his ecclesiastical history, records a remarkable tradition, that the woman healed of the bleeding, the daughter, had a statue erected in her city of Caesarea Philippi in front of her house. A bronze figure of a woman on her knees, reaching upward, a figure of a man with his hand extended downward. And where the man's robe touched the woman's hand, Eusebius says, a plant grew. A plant that, when it reached the hem of the statue's robe, was said to have healing properties. Whether the statue was real or legend, the tradition tells us something true. The people who knew this story could not stop looking at that moment of contact. They built something around it. They did not want to forget what it looked like when the untouchable reached out and was not refused. There is a blind man sitting by the road outside Jericho. His name is Bartimaeus. Mark gives us his name, which means he was remembered. He is not a background figure. He is a blind beggar who starts shouting the moment he hears that Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And when people in the crowd tell him to be quiet, he shouts louder, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stops. He always stops. He tells them to call the man over, and Bartimaeus throws off his cloak, his only possession, his warmth, his mat, and jumps to his feet and comes to Jesus. And Jesus asks him the same question he has asked others. What do you want me to do for you? Rabbi, I want to see. And immediately he receives his sight. Here is what happens next, and it is easy to miss. Bartimaeus does not go home. He follows Jesus on the road. After his healing, the first thing he does with his new eyes is use them to follow the man who gave them to him. He walks the road toward Jerusalem. He does not know what is waiting at the end of that road, but he goes anyway. That road leads to a cross. And this is where we need to talk about the things I told you to hold on to at the beginning. I want to ask you something before we go further. When you imagine the last person to touch Jesus before the resurrection, who do you picture? Mary Magdalene at the tomb? One of the disciples in the upper room? Someone who loved him? The answer is harder than that. The last hands to touch Jesus before he died were the hands of Roman soldiers pressing a crown of thorns onto his head. The last contact before the cross was not a healing. It was not a cry of faith or a desperate reach through a crowd. It was a strike, a blow. Hands that had been touched by lepers, that had reached into rooms of grief and taken dead girls by the hand, that had steadied a sinking fisherman on the surface of the water. Those hands were bound, and the body that had radiated dunamis, power, was beaten until there was nothing left to take. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the first century, describes Jesus of Nazareth as one who wrought surprising feats and attracted many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was, by any account of the era, a man known for what his hands did. And at the end, what was done to those hands was nails. This is the dark inversion of every story we have told tonight. The leper ran to Jesus and was made clean. But here, in the final hours, the violence done to Jesus did not make the soldiers unclean. It broke open something older than the purity code. It broke open the reason the purity code existed at all. Here is what the soldiers did not know. Here is what nobody standing at that cross understood in that moment. The body they were dismantling was not a body that could stay broken. 3 days later, in a locked room in Jerusalem, the disciples are hiding. Thomas is not there when Jesus first appears. We do not know where he was. When the others tell him what they saw, he says something honest, more honest than most of us would be willing to say out loud. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. A week passes. Jesus comes again. The doors are still locked, and he looks directly at Thomas and says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas does not need to touch him. The invitation is enough. He falls and says the highest confession in the Gospel of John, "My Lord and my God." But here's the thing I cannot stop thinking about. Jesus kept the wounds. He is risen. He is glorified. He has conquered death and walked out of a sealed tomb and passed through locked doors. He could have appeared in any form. He appeared with the wounds still in his hands and his side, not as damage, not as defeat, as evidence, as proof that the body which had touched every outcast and untouchable in Galilee had itself been touched by the worst thing the world could do and had not been destroyed by it. If you have been touched by something that felt like it should have ended you, I want you to hear this. The resurrection did not erase the wounds. It carried them forward. They became the thing Thomas needed to believe. They became the proof. Whatever has left marks on you, whatever you have been pressing your hands against, hoping something will change, you are not reaching towards someone who has never been broken. You are reaching towards someone who kept the scars. Before we go, subscribe if you haven't. There is far more of this ahead. And the next story is one I think will stay with you for a long time. But first, 3 things to carry with you from tonight. First, every person who touched Jesus in this list was either violating a social rule, crossing a boundary, or doing something that made the people around them uncomfortable. The leper ran into a public road. The bleeding woman pressed through a crowd she was not supposed to enter. The sinful woman walked into a Pharisee's house uninvited. Bartimaeus shouted when he was told to be quiet. Jesus never once pulled back. If you think your approach to God is too disruptive, too messy, too much, look at the list again. Second, Jesus felt the power leave him. Dunamis. That word means something real went out of him when the bleeding woman was healed. He was not unaffected by the cost of what he did. Healing moved through him the way grief moves through a person. If you have ever wondered whether God is unmoved by what you are asking, remember, he is not a vending machine. He is not a system. He is a person who feels the weight of what passes through him. Third, and this is the one I want to leave with you, he kept the wounds. After everything, after the resurrection, after the locked room appearances, and the walk to Emmaus, and the breakfast on the beach, the wounds are still there, not because he forgot to heal them, because he chose not to. Thomas needed them. Maybe you do too. Maybe you need to know that the one you are reaching toward is not so far above suffering that he cannot remember what it felt like to be in it. He reached out his hand and touched the untouchable. He stopped in a crowd for one trembling woman. He walked into a room of mocking mourners and took a dead girl by the hand. He let a woman dry his feet with her hair while everyone at the table watched. He invited a doubting man to put his fingers into wounds that should not still exist. And across 2,000 years, every person who has reached desperate, messy, half-believing, out of options, has found the same thing that woman found when she touched the hem of his robe, that something moves, that power goes out, that you are called daughter, son, that he was willing all along.